Hello, fellow friends of the universe and the earth. I am glad that you've come in here today, and I hope that you will enjoy your stay at Philosophical ASMR. And so, today I will be reading a book. This book, the lighting is a little bit off. This book is called, as you can see, Subjectivity. It is a philosophical book written by Nick Mansfield. Here you want to feel the book. You want to feel it. Here. You can take a look. Yeah. Take a look. It is quite an interesting book, to be sure. It's about the I, how we view ourselves, among other things, and how the I, the sense of self, has changed, and the subjectivity, therefore, has changed in the last century or so. And Nick, the writer of the book, has taken into account and looking at the work of some phenomenal psychologists and philosophers through time, such as Freud and Nietzsche. It's an interesting book about self-identity and subjectivity, and I hope you will like what I read here to you today. Okay? Yeah, I hope so. And so we will begin this question of the subject and the living, who is at the heart of the most pressing concerns of modern societies. What am I referring to when I say the word I? This little word, which is somehow the easiest to use in our daily lives, has become the focus of the most intense and at times the most obscure debate and analysis in fin de siècle cultural studies. Where does my sense of self come from? Was it made for me, or did it arise spontaneously? How is it conditioned by the media I consume, the society I inhabit, the politics I suffer, and the desires that inspire me? When I use the word I, am I using it in the same way as you when you use it? Am I a different I? When I present myself in different ways to my boss, my family, my friends, social security, someone I'm in love with, or a stranger in the street? Do I really know myself? Is it these difficult and open-ended questions that, in different ways and perhaps simply in different vocabularies, occupy the theoretical reflection of intellectuals and the anxious self-scrutiny of the citizens of the end of the 20th century? The I is thus a meeting point between the most formal and highly abstract concepts and the most immediate and intense emotions. This focus on the self as the center both of lived experience and of discernible meaning has become one of the, if not the, defining issues of modern and postmodern cultures. As many postmodern theorists have tried to point out, The contemporary era is an era in which we must consistently confess our feelings. We answer magazine questionnaires about what we want, surveys about which politicians we like, focus groups about how we react to advertising campaigns, televised sport, war, accident, and crime are all designed to trigger emotion. The Olympic swimmer coming from the pool, the victim's relatives coming from court, the accident survivor pulled from the wreckage almost front the cameras and say how they feel. Our entertainment, our social values, even the work we do and the governments we elect are all to be understood in terms of satisfaction, pleasure, like and dislike, excitement and boredom, love and hate. A world where we once knew ourselves in terms of values and identities has given way to the uninterrupted intensities of elation and grief, triumph and trauma, loss and achievement, birth, death, survival, crime, consumption, career are all now pretext for emotion. Even economics is driven by its painstaking graphs of consumer sentiment. Things and events are now understood on the level of the pulsing, breathing, feeling individual self, yet at the same time this self is reported to feel less confident, more isolated, fragile and vulnerable than ever, rather than being triumphant because of the huge emphasis it now enjoys. The self is at risk. Selfhood is now seen to be in a state of perpetual crisis in the modern West. Alienated intellectuals and suicidal youth, culture wars and volatile markets, endless addictions to food, work, alcohol and narcotics, sexual inadequacy, and thrill killers all feed into education and entertainment industries that keep the intensity of our selfhood perpetually on the boil, nagging and unsettling, but also inspiring and thrilling us with mystery, fear and pleasure. It is this ambivalence and ambiguity, the intensification of the self as the key side of human experience and its increasing sense of internal fragmentation and chaos that the 20th century's theories of subjectivity have tried to deal with. This book serves two purposes. One, to outline the various ways in which the issue of the self has been discussed, and to try to sketch some sort of account of how the self, more than family, locality, ethnicity and nationality, has become the key way in which we now understand our lives, in Western society at least. So what do you think? What do you think so far? Is it interesting? Is it not interesting? Am I reading it well enough? I think I need some more to be more alive when I read, and maybe yeah, I think maybe. So I will continue for a little while. I hope you will fall into slumber soon. Fall into slumber. You look so tired. Think you will fall asleep soon. Don't worry, my friend. I think you will. Okay, so the next subject subject and self. Before proceeding, it is worth dwelling on the word subject and its meaning, since it is this term that is most often used in cultural theories about the self. Although the two are sometimes used interchangeably, the word self does not capture the sense of social and cultural entanglement that is implicit in the word subject. The way our immediate daily life is always already caught up in complex political, social and philosophical, that is, shared concerns. As Vincent Descombes has pointed out, when philosopher René Descartes wrote, "I think, therefore I am," the I he described was not limited to René Descartes, although he does not simply leave his own selfhood behind. This philosophical formulation claims to describe a faculty of reflection that links human interiority together everywhere. Subjectivity refers, therefore, to an abstract or general principle that defies our separation into distinct selves, and that encourages us to imagine that, or simply helps us to understand why, our interior lives inevitably seem to involve other people, either as objects of need, desire and interest, or as necessary sharers of common experience. In this way, the subject is always linked to something outside of it, an idea or principle, or the society of other subjects. It is this linkage that the word subject insists upon. Etymologically, to be subject means to be placed or even thrown. The word subject therefore proposes that the self is not a separate and isolated entity, but one that operates at the intersection of general truths and shared principles. It is the nature of these truths and principles. It is the nature of these truths and principles, whether they determine or are determined by us as individuals, in short, the range of the power that has dominated theory and debate. Types of subject. It is probably impossible to produce an exhaustive list of the way the term subject defines our relationship to the world. For the purposes of summary, however, we could say it has four broad usages. Firstly, there is the subject of grammar, the initiating or driving principle of the sentence. We know and use the word I first and foremost in this sense as the origins of the actions, feelings, and experiences that we collect together and report as our lives. As we shall see, this type of subjectivity is highly deceptive. It seems to bespeak the most simple and immediate sense of selfhood, but because we share the word with every other user of our language, it automatically entangles us in a huge and volatile, even infinite, trans-historical network of meaning-making. Secondly, there is the politico-legal subject. In various ways, the laws and constitutions that define the limits of our social interaction and ostensibly embody our most respectable values understand us as recipients of and actors within fixed codes and powers, we are subject of and to the monarch, the state and the law. In theory, in liberal democratic societies at least, this sort of subjectivity demands our honest citizenship and respects our individual rights. Because of this reciprocal obligation, we enter into, or at least agree to, what Jean-Jacques Rousseau first called a social contract, which are certain responsibility of us and guarantees us certain freedoms in return. So the social contract of Rousseau. Interesting. Thirdly, there is the philosophical subject. About Rousseau, I studied a little bit of pedagogy, and I happened upon Rousseau. I studied didactics, and I stumbled upon Rousseau. Very interesting. Had a lot to say about children's upbringing and such. And so the social contract he speaks about. Thirdly, there is the philosophical subject. Here the I is both an object of analysis and the ground of truth and knowledge. In a defining contribution to Western philosophy, to which we will return in Chapter 1, Immanuel Kant outlined Kant, K-A-N-T. Immanuel Kant outlined the issues that define the problem of the subject of philosophy. How can I know the world? How can I know how I should act in the world? And how can I judge the world? Here the subject is located at the center of truth, morality, and meaning. Fourthly, there is the subject as human person. No matter how exhaustive our analysis of our selfhood in terms of language, politics, and philosophy, we remain an intense focus of rich and immediate experience that defies system, logic, and order, and that goes out into the world in a complex, inconsistent, and highly charged way. Sometimes we seek to present this type of subjectivity as simple and unremarkable. We want to show ourselves as normal, ordinary, straightforward. At other times we long for charisma, risk, and celebrity, to make an impression and to be remembered. Usually we live an open-ended yet known, measured yet adventurous journey into experience, one we see as generally consistent and purposeful. It is this unfinished yet consistent subjectivity that we generally understand as our selfhood or personality. To a linguist, political scientist, philosopher, or therapist, the issues of subjectivity can be understood in terms of rigorously maintained disciplinary borders. What makes a sentence meaningful, a civic society stable, a philosophical thesis defensible, or a personal problem solvable, all contribute in different yet important ways to our lives as subjects. Yet the needs of each of these specialists often leads to hostility and skepticism towards the other equally useful approaches. This book, however, comes from the field of cultural studies. In the rich and unpredictable field of culture, where we make, perfect, and communicate the meaning and meaninglessness that allow us to live, There can be no strict and simple demarcation between the subject of the spoken sentence, the citizen in court, the searcher after truth, and the person walking in the street. Indeed, it is the way in which these different understandings of the subject interpret and complicate one another that counts in the field of culture. In this way, our definition of the subject must remain speculative and incomplete. And so it is a vague description so far of the word subjectivity and subject and I, selfhood, etc. In turn, this also explains many of the choices I have made about which theories and theorists to discuss in this book. On the whole, my discussion is dominated by those whose impact has been most keenly felt in the humanities and in literary and cultural studies in particular. This leaves to one side many key figures in a more specific and more rigorous philosophical discussion, particularly in the tradition of phenomenology, which runs from Edmund Husserl through Martin Heidegger, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and Emmanuel Levinas to Jacques Derrida. In chapter 1, a brief discussion of Heidegger's highly influential contribution to theories of the subject will give some indication of the impact that phenomenology has had. A genealogy of subjectivity. The theorization of subjectivity in the 20th century has produced a range of different models and approaches. It is not even agreed with any certainty what the subject itself is. Different theories follow different paths to different ends. Yet a consistent set of disagreements always marks out an important zone of debate, which can in turn clarify what has been important to us and indeed the material of the oldest investigation in humanist and post-humanist culture. How is it that we live? This book attempts to map out the range and structure of the debate about subjectivity that has done so much to animate the contemporary humanities and the cultural politics it inspires. To use Michael Foucault's terminology, therefore, this project is genealogical rather than metaphysical. A metaphysical investigation aims to determine by the systematic analysis and scrutiny of ideas what the truth of a certain argument may be. In this context, a metaphysician would analyze and critique theories of subjectivity in such a way that a preferred or ultimate theory could be derived. Psychoanalysts may say one thing and discourse theories another, according to the metaphysician, but these various theories are just the stepping stones to the inevitable final theory, shimmering tantalizingly on the horizon of our investigations. The goal that we will one day reach and discover. The genealogical approach, on the other hand, takes the theories themselves as the object of analysis. The question to be answered is not how do we get beyond these theories to the truth they aspire to but fail to reveal, but question is, what do the debates and theories themselves tell us about where we are placed in the history of culture and meaning making? How do we get beyond these theories to the truth they aspire to but fail to reveal? But what do the debates and theories themselves tell us about where we are placed in the history of culture and meaning making? The insight that the genealogist seeks is not the truth that will finally make further discussion redundant, but how the discussion itself, with its wild inconsistencies and its bitter antagonisms, in which the rivals, like enemy armies in some famous battles, never quite seem to catch sight of each other, defines the way we live and represent ourselves. In this sense, the purpose of this book is not to try to explain the subject itself, but to reach a better understanding of how the issue of subjectivity has become so important to us. There are a number of reasons why I have adopted this approach. Firstly, I am not confident that the human subject is susceptible to final explanation. This is not to repeat the romantic idea that the human soul is so unique and mysterious that any rational or analytical process will never reveal its final determinants. Both sides of this particular debate, those who want to pin the subject down definitively and those who resist them, rest on the same model of subjectivity. For those who believe that we will one day have an ultimate model of the self, subjectivity must be a consistent and quantifiable entity, a stable thing whose limits we can know and whose structure we can map. For those who believe the opposite, subjectivity is also a thing, but an ineffable one, producing intensities, emotions, and values that are so beautiful or unique that they bear witness to an ultimate, irreplaceable, and inexplicable individuality that is dazzling yet self-contained, like a precious jewel. Yet whether it is considered as scientific object or spiritual artifact, this model remains one of a unique and fixed subject. The only variation is whether it should be understood in rational impersonal or spiritual personal terms. I do not believe that the subject is like this. Subjectivity is primarily an experience and remains permanently open to inconsistency, contradiction, and unself-consciousness. Our experience of ourselves remains forever prone to surprising disjunctions that only the fierce light of ideology or theoretical dogma convinces us can be homogenized into a single consistent thing. Perhaps each of the imperfect theories we will discuss in the course of this book accounts for, or at least provides a way of representing some aspect or moment of our experience, giving us little flashes of insight or self-recognition that are sometimes pleasurable, sometimes reassuring, but never the final resting place for our reflection on ourselves. Indeed, even when we argue forcefully for a specific theorist or theory, we never go so far as to say that every aspect of our own subjectivity finds its value there. Many will know the famous anecdote about Freud's refusal to analyze his own cigar smoking in terms of Oedipal and castration theory. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, he is reported to have said. Even for the most ambitious and hubristic theorists, there is something about their own subjectivity that they refuse to pin down. In sum, then, I would have to say that not only do I not believe that an ultimate theory of the subject is possible, I also do not want one. It is the discussion itself that is of interest. It is worth noting that a genealogical rather than a metaphysical approach to the subject flies in the face of one of the oldest duties of thought in the West, the Socratic Platonic command, renewed in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, to know oneself. In postmodern theory, as we shall see, this very command has been seen as destructive. Much contemporary thought aims to protect us from anything as definitive or as self-knowledge. I think we will stop here today, and I will take a note where we are. Maybe I will continue to read another day. That is the hope and ambition. And so I thank you for listening. If you've stayed for this long, you are definitely amazing, and I appreciate you. I thank you very much, and I do hope you have a wonderful night's sleep.